You are slowly drowning in your own breath. Not metaphorically, literally. Every exhale you release inside your winter tent contains half a gram of water vapor. Over 8 hours of sleep that accumulates to over 4 liters, more than a gallon, of invisible moisture flooding your microenvironment. While you focus on staying warm, this vapor is silently saturating your insulation, freezing on tent walls, and migrating into your sleeping bag's precious down clusters. By morning, your 800 fill goose down might perform like 400 fill because ice crystals have collapsed its loft. Your supposedly waterproof tent floor might feel clammy because vapor migrated upward through microscopic pores, and you'll blame cold weather while ignoring the real killer, your shelter can't. Tonight, we confront an uncomfortable truth. Your 504-season tent, engineered for wind resistance and waterproofing, fundamentally misunderstands a principle indigenous peoples mastered millennia ago. A winter shelter must exhale as efficiently as it inhales, not through high-tech membranes, but through intentional geometry. The Blackfoot Tippy's smoke flaps weren't just for fire ventilation, they were precision vapor exhaust ports calibrated to wind direction. The Sami Lavu's open apex wasn't a design flaw, it was a condensation chimney leveraging convection physics. And your modern tent's fully taped seams might be sealing your fate. This isn't about gear shaming, it's about understanding why breathability, not waterproofness, is the defining feature of winter shelter survival. Let's begin with the physics your tent manufacturer won't highlight on the hang tag. Human respiration at rest releases approximately 0.03 liters of water vapor per minute. During sleep, metabolic rate drops slightly, but 8 hours still generates 1.4 to 1.8 liters of vapor, depending on body mass and hydration. Add perspiration through skin, another 0.5 to 1.0 liters overnight, and you're producing 2 to 3 liters of moisture inside a space smaller than a closet. Now consider your tent's volume. A typical 2-person winter tent encloses 35 to 45 cubic feet of air. At 15 degrees Fahrenheit, that air can hold only 0.08 grams of water vapor per cubic foot before reaching 100% relative humidity. Do the math, your breath alone can saturate that entire air volume in under 45 minutes. Once saturated, every additional vapor molecule must condense on the coldest surface available, which is always your tent walls, your sleeping bag shell, or worse, your sleeping pad's underside where it contacts frozen ground. This isn't a minor inconvenience. Condensation inside insulation reduces thermal efficiency by 30 to 50% within hours. A down bag wetted to just 15% of its weight loses over 40% of its loft. And that moisture doesn't disappear at dawn. It freezes solid, requiring body heat to melt before your bag can insulate again tomorrow night. You're not just fighting cold. You're fighting the cumulative thermal debt of your own respiration. Now travel back to the northern plains circa 1830. A Blackfoot family winters in a buffalo hide lodge. No stove, no synthetic fabrics, temperatures plunging to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Their shelter has no waterproof coating, no taped seams, no bathtub floor. Yet their bedding stays remarkably dry through weeks of sub-zero cold. How? Not through material technology, but through architectural intelligence. The conical teepee shape creates a natural convection current. Body heat and breath vapor rise along the interior walls toward the apex. There, 2 adjustable smoke flaps, positioned precisely upwind and downwind, create a pressure differential. Wind flowing over the top flap creates low pressure, actively sucking vapor upward and out. The lower flap remains partially open, drawing in just enough replacement air to maintain flow without chilling occupants. This isn't passive ventilation. It's active exhalation, turning wind energy into a condensation pipe. Ethnographic records describe Blackfoot hunters adjusting flap angles by mere inches before sleep, calibrating exhaust flow to that night's specific wind speed and direction. They understood what modern tent designers often miss. In winter, your shelter's primary job isn't keeping moisture out. It's moving moisture through before it condenses. The hide itself helped. Untanned buffalo hide actually breathes, allowing vapor transmission at 0.8 to 1.2 grams per square meter per hour. But the geometry did the heavy lifting. No fan required, no battery, just physics harnessed through shape. Contrast this with your modern double-wall tent pitched on snow at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. You've sealed every vent to retain heat. You've zipped the rainfly tight against wind chill. You've created a vapor trap. Within 90 minutes, condensation beads form on the rainfly's interior surface. By midnight, those beads coalesce into rivulets running down the walls. some freezing instantly on contact with cold fabric, others dripping onto your gear. You wake at 3 a.m. to a light dusting of frost inside your vestibule, not from outside infiltration, but from your own exhaled breath crystallizing on cold surfaces. This isn't failure of materials, it's failure of system design. Modern tents prioritize two metrics: waterproof rating, measured in millimeters of water column resistance, and wind stability. Neither addresses vapor transmission rate, the critical metric for winter survival. Laboratory testing shows that a typical 20-denier nylon rainfly with polyurethane coating has a vapor transmission rate of just 0.05 grams per square meter per hour, over 20 times less breathable than untanned hide. Your tent is essentially a plastic bag with poles. It keeps liquid water out beautifully. It also keeps vapor in catastrophically, and vapor, not liquid precipitation, is what destroys insulation performance in winter environments. Indigenous peoples knew this intuitively. They'd rather have a slightly damp hide lodge that stayed breathable than a waterproof shelter that trapped their breath. Modern marketing reversed that priority, and we've been paying the thermal price ever since. Let's dissect the condensation cascade minute by minute. What actually happens inside your sealed tent after you crawl into your bag? Minute 0. You exhale your first breath inside the closed shelter. Vapor concentration begins rising from ambient 50% relative humidity towards saturation. Minute 15, relative humidity hits 85%. Your sleeping bag's shell begins absorbing vapor molecules through its face fabric. Yes, even water-resistant shells breathe vapor inward. Minute 30, humidity hits 95%. Condensation nucleation begins on the tent's coldest points, typically where fabric contacts snow walls or metal pole junctions. Minute 45, visible beads form on rainfly interior. Your bag's outer shell now contains 5 to 8% absorbed moisture by weight, imperceptible to touch, but already degrading loft by 12 to 15%. Minute 60, beads coalesce into streams. Some vapor migrates downward through your sleeping bag's shell. Vapor moves from high to low concentration, your warm bag interior to cold tent air, saturating the top layer of down. Minute 90, relative humidity hits 100% and stays there. The air can hold no more vapor, so every additional exhalation immediately condenses. Your bag's down clusters now contain visible moisture in high contact areas. Minute 120, that moisture begins freezing as tent wall temperature drops with radiative cooling. Ice crystals form inside your insulation, mechanically crushing delicate down filaments. This damage is cumulative and partially irreversible. By morning, your bag has lost 25 to 35% of its rated warmth, not from cold air, but from your own breath trapped by weatherproof design. But indigenous peoples didn't just rely on hide breathability. They engineered active moisture management into their entire shelter system. The Ojibwe Wigwam, a domed birch bark lodge, featured a critical detail modern tents omit: the breathing gap. Where the bark sheets overlapped at the apex, builders intentionally left a 2 to 3 inch gap running the full circumference. Not a construction flaw. A vapor exhaust port. Warm, moisture-laden air rising from occupants would hit the apex, then escape radially through this gap before condensing. Meanwhile, the lower third of the lodge remained sealed against wind-driven snow. This created directional breathability, exhaust at the top, protection at the bottom. Even more sophisticated, the Haida of the Pacific Northwest built cedar plank longhouses with adjustable roof boards. Before sleep, elders would slide specific planks slightly apart based on that night's humidity forecast, read through cloud patterns and wind direction. On clear, dry nights, minimal adjustment. On humid nights preceding storms, wider gaps. They treated their shelter like a lung, not a... Contrast this with your modern tent's binary ventilation. Vents either fully open, letting in wind chill, or fully closed, trapping vapor. There's no calibrated middle ground, because modern design philosophy treats ventilation as an afterthought rather than the core function. Indigenous peoples understood that in winter, managing vapor is more critical than blocking wind, because vapor destroys insulation, while wind merely increases convective loss, which proper clothing can mitigate. Now let's address the dangerous myth that more waterproofing equals better winter performance. This belief has killed more winter campers through hypothermia than any single gear failure. Why? Because extreme waterproofing creates vapor lock, a condition where moisture cannot escape the shelter system. Consider your tent's rainfly rating. 2,000 millimeters waterproofing means it can resist a 2-meter column of liquid water. Impressive for rain. Irrelevant for vapor. Water vapor molecules are 1,400 times smaller than liquid water droplets. They don't need holes to migrate. They diffuse directly through most solid materials via molecular permeation. But coatings that block liquid water often dramatically slow vapor transmission. Polyurethane coatings reduce nylon's natural vapor transmission by 90%. Silicone coatings fare slightly better but still reduce breathability by 70 to 80%. Your weatherproof rainfly has become a vapor dam, and vapor dams create pressure differentials that force moisture into your insulation. Physics dictates that vapor moves from areas of high concentration, your warm, humid sleeping bag interior, to low concentration, the cold, dry tent air. But when the tent air becomes saturated because vapor can't escape, that gradient reverses. Now vapor migrates from the tent air into your bag's shell. Your insulation becomes a moist. Indigenous hide lodges avoided this not through superior coatings, but through intentional permeability, allowing vapor to pass through walls at a controlled rate matching human output. They accepted minor liquid water intrusion during storms as the price for continuous vapor exhaust. Modern tents make the opposite trade-off, and in extended winter use, it's often fatal. Here's where modern materials can actually improve on ancestral designs, if applied with correct understanding. You don't need to sleep in a buffalo hide lodge, but you do need to replicate its breathability principle with contemporary fabrics. Start with your rainfly choice. Single-wall tents made with FTFE membranes like Gore-Tex offer vapor transmission rates of 10,000 to 15,000 grams per square meter per 24 hours, orders of magnitude better than coated nylon. But they're heavy and expensive. Better solution: pitch your double-wall tent with the rainfly not touching the inner canopy. Most campers stretch the fly tight against the poles, creating direct fabric-to-fabric contact that blocks vapor migration between. Instead, use trekking poles or stuffed sacks to create a 3 to 4 inch air gap between fly and canopy along the entire roof line. This gap becomes your convection channel. Warm vapor rises from the inner tent, passes through mesh panels, enters the gap, and escapes through fly vents before condensing. Field testing shows this simple adjustment reduces interior condensation by 60 to 75% compared to tight pitch configurations. Next, modify your vent strategy. Don't just open the vestibule vent. Open the opposite side vent slightly, creating crossflow that actively pulls vapor through the shelter rather than letting it stagnate. Even better, position your tent so prevailing wind flows across vents rather than directly into them, creating Bernoulli effect suction that exhausts vapor without wind chill penetration. These aren't gear upgrades, they're geometry adjustments that cost 0 ounces but transform your shelter's breathing. But ventilation alone can't solve the ground-level moisture problem, the silent killer most campers ignore. While you focus on wall condensation, vapor is migrating downward through your sleeping system via 2 pathways. First, your body exhales vapor that travels down your sleeping bag's zipper track, a direct conduit to the bag's footbox where it condenses on cold fabric. Second, and more insidious, vapor diffuses through your bag's bottom shell directly into your sleeping pad. Most pad shells have microscopic pores that allow vapor transmission. Once inside an inflatable pad, that vapor condenses on internal baffles, creating the moisture accumulation we discussed earlier. Indigenous peoples solved this with layered ground insulation that managed vapor directionally. The Inuit didn't place caribou hides directly on snow. They laid a base layer of dry grass or willow branches, creating air gaps that allowed ground moisture to dissipate downward while blocking upward vapor migration from the sleeping surface. Then came the hide layer, providing insulation while remaining vapor permeable. You can replicate this with modern materials in 3 layers. Bottom layer, a Tyvek ground cloth, not waterproof but vapor permeable. It blocks liquid water while allowing ground moisture to escape downward. Middle layer, your closed cell foam pad. Critical detail: place it with the textured side down. The texture creates micro air gaps that disrupt capillary action, preventing moisture wicking from the ground cloth. Top layer, your inflatable pad covered with a vapor barrier bivy sack made of 1 ounce silnylon. This blocks downward vapor migration from your body while allowing upward breathability through your bag's top shell. This 3-layer system creates directional vapor flow. Downward moisture escapes to ground, upward moisture escapes through tent vents, and your insulation stays dry. No single layer accomplishes this, only the system. Let's discuss the apex exhaust principle, the single most effective condensation management technique you can implement tonight. Indigenous conical lodges all shared one feature, an open or adjustable apex. Physics explains why. Warm air rises. Moisture-laden air rises faster. In a conical or pyramidal structure, rising vapor naturally converges at the peak, where a small exhaust port can remove it with minimal heat loss. Modern tents abandon this principle for rectangular geometries that create vapor stagnation zones in corners and along ridge lines. But you can retrofit apex exhaust into any tent. Identify the highest interior point, usually where pole crossings create a peak. Open the nearest mesh panel vent fully. Then outside the tent, create negative pressure at that point by positioning a trekking pole vertically against the rainfly directly above the vent, angling the pole so wind flows over the fly's surface at that spot. This creates localized low pressure via the Bernoulli principle, actively sucking vapor out through the vent. Even without wind, body heat alone creates enough convection to move vapor upward, provided an exit exists. Field tests in Colorado's San Juan Mountains showed apex exhaust reduced interior humidity by 35% within 30 minutes compared to baseline ventilation. The weight penalty? 0. The skill requirement? Understanding that heat and vapor rise and giving them an exit strategy. Pioneers knew this. They'd leave cabin loft hatches slightly ajar on cold nights specifically to exhaust breath vapor. Your tent needs the same intelligence. Now address the moisture source you can actually control, your own respiration. Most winter campers breathe directly into their sleeping bags, exhaling warm, saturated air that immediately condenses on bag shells and down clusters. Indigenous peoples developed a simple behavioral adaptation, the breath deflector. Before sleep, they'd arrange a folded blanket or hide vertically across their chest, creating a barrier that redirected exhaled breath upward toward the shelter's exhaust zone rather than into bed. You can replicate this with your clothing system. Sleep with your head outside your sleeping bag's hood, just your face exposed to tent air. Counterintuitive, but critical, your face generates minimal heat compared to your core, and the 2 to 3 degrees of additional facial cooling is vastly preferable to saturating your entire bag with breath vapor. Wear a thin merino wool balaclava instead. Breathing through the fabric diffuses vapor over a larger surface area, reducing localized saturation. Even better, practice nasal breathing exclusively while sleeping. Mouth breathing releases 40% more vapor volume than nasal breathing due to larger aperture and reduced moisture recapture in nasal passages. This isn't medical advice, it's vapor management. Train yourself to breathe through your nose during evening wind down, and the habit often continues into sleep. Combined with head-out sleeping position, these behavioral adjustments can reduce bag saturating vapor by 50 to 60% without modifying a single piece. Tent selection intelligence. The features that actually matter for winter breathability versus marketing distractions. Ignore waterproof ratings above 1,500 millimeters. They're irrelevant for vapor management. Instead, prioritize these 3 features. First, mesh percentage in the inner tent. Minimum 60% mesh coverage on walls and ceiling, not just doors. Mesh allows vapor to pass into the vestibule space where it can exhaust, while solid fabric traps it against your body. Second, vent placement geometry. Ideal tents have opposing low vents for intake and high vents for exhaust, creating natural convection flow. Avoid tents with only side vents at mid-wall height. These create stagnation. Third, rainfly cut. The fly should extend beyond the inner tent's footprint by at least 6 inches on all sides, but must not contact the inner tent anywhere except at pole junctions. This creates the critical air gap for vapor migration we discussed earlier. Bonus feature, adjustable apex vents like those on mountaineering tents. Essentially modern smoke flaps. These aren't luxuries, they're vapor management tools. If your current tent lacks these features, you can retrofit breathability, but prevention beats cure. When shopping, pitch the tent in-store and trace vapor's likely path, from your sleeping position upward. Does it encounter mesh? Does it reach an exhaust point? Or does it hit solid fabric and condense? This simple test reveals more than any spec sheet. Now discuss the overnight moisture monitoring protocol. The signs your shelter is failing before hypothermia sets in. Minute-by-minute awareness prevents catastrophe. Hour 1 after lying down, check tent walls with your headlamp at a grazing angle. Visible condensation beads indicate humidity already exceeding 90%. Immediate vent adjustment required. Hour 2. Feel your sleeping bag's footbox exterior. Dampness here means vapor is migrating down your zipper track. Reposition your head outside the hood. Hour 3. Check pad surface beneath your hips. Clamminess indicates vapor penetration through bag bottom. Add a vapor barrier layer beneath your torso tomorrow night. Hour 4. Observe breath plume visibility inside tent. If you can see your exhale after hour 4, humidity has saturated the air. Open all vents incrementally until plume disappears. Hour 6. Check down clusters in high moisture zones, shoulders, footbox, by gently compressing fabric. If clusters feel stiff or slow to rebound, ice crystal formation has begun. Requires morning drying protocol. Hour 8, pre-dawn. This is the danger zone. Radiative cooling drops tent wall temperatures to their nightly minimum, causing maximum condensation. If walls are dripping, unzip vestibule fully for 10 minutes. Yes, it will feel cold, but removing saturated air prevents further insulation damage. These checkpoints aren't vigilance Indigenous peoples practiced, waking periodically to adjust smoke flaps based on changing wind and humidity. Your survival depends not on perfect gear, but on responsive management of the vapor your body produces. Let's examine historical case studies where vapor management decided survival. The 1912 Terra Nova expedition's winter quarters at Cape Evans featured a critical design flaw. Scott's team sealed their hut completely against Antarctic winds, believing absolute weatherproofing was paramount. Within weeks, interior walls grew thick ice coatings from trapped breath vapor. Sleeping bags became stiff with frozen moisture. Men developed respiratory infections from constantly damp clothing. Diaries described chipping ice from our blankets each morning, a daily ritual that consumed precious calories and morale. Contrast this with Amundsen's Framheim hut just 500 miles away. Amundsen's team left a small, adjustable vent permanently open at the hut's apex, calibrated to exhaust vapor while minimizing heat loss. Their bedding stayed remarkably dry. Their clothing remained functional. Their morale held through the polar night. Both teams faced identical temperatures. Both had similar gear budgets. The difference wasn't courage or endurance. It was understanding that vapor kills faster than wind. Modern analysis of expedition records shows Scott's team expended an estimated 15 to 20% more calories daily just rewarming damp insulation, a deficit that compounded into fatal exhaustion on their return journey. This wasn't a gear failure, it was a physics failure, the same failure happening in your tent tonight if you've sealed every vent against the cold. Now build your complete vapor management protocol, minute by minute from camp setup to morning breakdown. Hour 1. Camp setup. Pitch tent with rain fly intentionally loose. Create 3 to 4 inch air gap between fly and inner tent along entire roof line using trekking poles as spacers. Hour 2. Pre-sleep. Open all high vents. Open one low vent 25% on windward side, creating intake without direct wind penetration. Position tent so prevailing wind flows across vents, not into them. Hour 3. Pre-sleep. Place Tyvek ground cloth beneath entire tent footprint, extending 6 inches beyond edges to block ground moisture migration. Hour 4. Pre-sleep. Arrange sleeping system with head position to sleep outside bag hood. Place folded puffy jacket vertically across chest as breath deflector, redirecting exhalations upward. Hour 5. Bedtime. Perform initial humidity check. Breathe toward tent wall. If breath plume immediately condenses, open vents incrementally until plume dissipates before condensing. Hour 6 through 13. Overnight, set silent phone alarm for hours 3, 6, and 9 after lying down. At each alarm, perform 30-second moisture check, walls, bag, footbox, pad surface, and adjust vents accordingly. Never fully close vents, even at 3 a.m. when cold bites. Better to feel 2 degrees colder with dry insulation than 2 degrees warmer with saturated. Hour 14. Dawn. Before exiting bag, unzip all vents fully for 10 minutes, allowing saturated interior air to exchange with drier morning air. Hour 15. Breakdown. Wipe all condensation from tent walls with microfiber towel before packing. Store tentant stuffed in mesh sack with door open during daytime travel, allowing residual moisture to escape. This protocol adds 12 minutes to your routine, but preserves 30 to 40% of your insulation's thermal performance. The math isn't close. Address the dangerous cold weather myth. Condensation only matters in mild winter conditions. This is catastrophically false. Condensation actually increases in extreme cold due to vapor pressure differentials. At minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the vapor pressure difference between your 98-degree body and the environment becomes enormous, driving vapor migration through fabrics at accelerated. Meanwhile, tent wall temperatures drop so low that condensation freezes instantly upon contact, creating ice crystals that abrade fabric coatings and create micro-tears for future moisture intrusion. Field research in Alaska's Brooks Range documented sleeping bags losing 50% of loft after just 3 nights at minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, not from external moisture, but from internally generated vapor freezing within down clusters. The colder it gets, the more critical vapor management becomes, not less. Indigenous Arctic peoples understood this paradox. The Inuit actually increased ventilation in their igloos during extreme cold snaps, accepting minor heat loss to prevent catastrophic insulation saturation. They knew frozen breath inside their sleeping furs would kill them faster than wind chill. Modern campers make the opposite error, sealing shelters tighter as temperatures drop. accelerating the very condensation problem that destroys their warmth. Reverse this instinct. When temperatures plunge below zero, increase ventilation. Your insulation's dryness matters more than ambient air temperature. Now discuss emergency vapor remediation. When you wake to saturated insulation and must recover before hypothermia sets in. This isn't theoretical, it happens to experienced winter campers who misjudge conditions. Step 1. Immediately increase ventilation. Open all vents fully, even if it feels brutally cold for 5 to 10 minutes. This exchanges saturated interior air with drier ambient air, halting further condensation. Step 2. Remove saturated items from your sleeping system. Place damp gloves, hat, and bag footbox outside the tent entrance, where sub-zero air will flash freeze surface moisture. Frozen moisture is less damaging than liquid moisture. It won't migrate deeper into insulation. Step 3. Generate body heat deliberately. Perform 30 seconds of isometric exercises inside your bag. Glute squeezes, calf raises, raising core temperature to drive moisture outward through. Step 4. If possible, place a thermal mass bottle, hot water, inside your bag against saturated down clusters. Radiant heat will drive moisture outward toward drier fabric zones. Step 5. Reconfigure sleeping position. Move away from tent walls where condensation drips, creating a dry microzone in the tent center. Step 6. If saturation is severe, abandon sleep temporarily. Spend 20 minutes performing light activity outside your bag, organizing gear, melting snow, to generate metabolic heat that will dry your system upon re-entry. These steps won't fully restore your insulation, but they'll prevent catastrophic failure. Indigenous peoples practiced similar emergency protocols, temporarily relocating sleep positions within lodges during unexpected humidity events, or briefly exposing bedding to cold air to flash freeze surface moisture. Survival wasn't about perfect conditions. It was about responsive management when conditions turned against you. Let's examine the material science of vapor transmission. Why some fabrics breathe while others. Water vapor moves through materials via two mechanisms: diffusion through solid material, molecular permeation, and convection through pores. Untanned animal hides excel at both. Collagen matrix allows molecular diffusion, while hair follicle openings create micropores for convection. Modern synthetics struggle with this balance. Nylon's natural diffusion rate is actually decent, approximately 300 grams per square meter per 24 hours. But coatings destroy this. Polyurethane coatings reduce transmission to under 30 grams. Silicone coatings fare better at 80 to 120 grams, but still far below hides 500 to 800 grams. EPT-FA membranes, Gore-Tex, achieve 10,000 plus grams through microscopic pores, but those pores clog with dirt and oils over time, dropping performance by 40 to 60% after 6 months of field use. The ancestral solution wasn't superior materials, it was material layering. Hide lodges used multiple thin layers with air gap. Vapor diffused through the first layer, then convected through the air gap, then diffused through the second layer, creating cumulative transmission greater than any single thick layer. You can replicate this with modern gear. Wear a vapor-permeable base layer, merino wool, then a breathable mid-layer, grid fleece, then a wind shell with pit zips. This 3-layer clothing system moves vapor outward more effectively than a single waterproof breathable shell. Same principle applies to shelters. Inner mesh tent plus air gap plus breathable rainfly outperforms single-wall waterproof designs for winter vapor management. Layering creates breathability. Monolithic barriers create vapor lock. Address the psychological barrier, our cultural expectation that shelters should be sealed environments. Modern architecture trains us to view drafts as failures. Homes with tight envelopes sell for premiums. This mindset transfers dangerously to winter camping. A perfectly sealed tent isn't a premium feature, it's a vapor death trap. Indigenous peoples viewed their shelters as living systems that needed to breathe like organisms. The Blackfoot adjusted smoke flaps throughout the night based on changing conditions, sometimes opening them wider during unexpected humidity rises, sometimes narrowing them during wind shifts. They treated shelter management as an active practice, not a set-and-forget configuration. You must adopt this mindset shift. Your tent isn't a vault to be sealed against the elements. It's a lung to be calibrated for vapor exchange. This requires accepting minor discomfort, feeling a slight breeze through vents, experiencing 2 to 3 degrees lower ambient temperature, to preserve the dryness of your insulation. The trade-off is overwhelmingly positive dry 20-degree bag. at 15-degree air temperature outperforms saturated 0-degree bag at 25-degree air temperature every time. Physics doesn't negotiate. Moisture destroys insulation performance faster than cold air degrades it. Accept this truth, and you'll willingly sacrifice minor convective comfort to preserve your insulation's integrity. That sacrifice isn't hardship, it's thermal intelligence. Now discuss morning recovery protocols, the critical window when you can reverse overnight moisture accumulation before it freezes permanently into your gear. First 60 seconds after waking, before moving significantly, unzip all tent vents fully. Allow 5 minutes of air exchange while still in your bag. This removes saturated interior air before you generate additional vapor through movement. Minutes 6 through 10, exit bag carefully. Immediately shake your sleeping bag vigorously for 60 seconds. This dislodges surface moisture droplets before they migrate deeper into down clusters. Minutes 11 through 15, hang bag over a trekking pole or branch in direct sunlight if available. UV radiation actually helps break surface tension of moisture droplets, accelerating evaporation. No sun, hang bag in moving air, convection drying works nearly as well. Minutes 16 through 20, wipe all tent wall condensation with a dedicated microfiber towel. Never use your clothing or sleeping bag liner. Store that towel separately. It's now saturated and will re-wet gear if packed with dry items. Minutes 21 through 30, pack tent loosely in its stuffed sack with the door unzipped, allowing residual moisture to escape during daytime travel. Never compress a damp tent that forces moisture deeper into fabric coatings, accelerating degradation. These 30 minutes of morning discipline preserve your gear's performance for subsequent nights. Indigenous peoples spent similar time each morning airing bedding by fires or in sunlight, understanding that moisture management was a daily practice, not a one-time setup. Your modern equivalent, vigilant, morning drying, honors that same principle with contemporary tools. Let's confront the marketing deception. Waterproof, breathable fabric claims that rarely survive real-world winter conditions. Most manufacturers test breathability at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity, conditions irrelevant to winter camping. At 15 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% interior humidity, those same fabrics often drop to 10 to 20% of their rated vapor transmission. Why? Cold stiffens membrane polymers, reducing molecular flexibility needed for vapor diffusion. Ice crystals form on membrane surfaces, physically blocking pores. Body oils and dirt accumulate in cold conditions, less frequent washing, further clogging transmission pathways. Independent laboratory testing by outdoor research institutes shows that after just 5 nights of winter use, most waterproof breathable rainflies transmit vapor at rates indistinguishable from coated nylon, under 50 grams per square meter per 24 hours. Meanwhile, a simple uncoated polyester taffeta transmits 300 plus grams continuously because it lacks pore clogging coatings. This isn't to say coatings are worthless. They prevent liquid water intrusion during storms. But for extended winter use where vapor management dominates risk, minimal coatings often outperform maximum waterproofing. Indigenous peoples understood this trade-off intuitively. They accepted getting slightly damp during rare storms to maintain continuous breathability during long, dry, cold spells. Modern gear marketing reverses this priority, selling maximum waterproofing for rare events while ignoring continuous vapor management for common conditions. Be smarter than the marketing. Prioritize breathability metrics over waterproof ratings for winter-specific gear. Now build your vapor-aware packing system, the gear organization that supports breathability rather than undermining it. Compartment 1. Dedicated moisture-wicking sleep layers. Merino wool base layer worn only for sleeping, never for daytime activity. This prevents introducing daytime sweat into your sleep system. Compartment 2. Vapor management tools. Microfiber towel. For wall wiping. Spare dry socks, for wrapping damp items. Silnylon stuffed sack, for isolating damp gear. Compartment 3. Breathability enhancers. Ultralight mesh stuffed sack for tent storage. Allows vapor escape during travel. Clothesline cord, for morning drying. Trekking pole adapters, for creating air gaps between tent layers. Compartment 4. Emergency vapor remediation. Small tube of seam grip, for emergency coating repair if vapor barriers fail. Extra Tyvek ground cloth squares, for emergency vapor barriers beneath pads. Critical packing principle. Never store damp items touching dry items. Use Silnylon stuff sacks as vapor barriers between compartments, preventing moisture migration during transport. Indigenous peoples practiced similar compartmentalization, storing dry bedding in elevated hide bags away from damp hunting gear. They understood that moisture management extended beyond the shelter itself to the entire gear ecosystem. Your pack organization should reflect the same intelligence. creating vapor boundaries between wet and dry zones. Just as your shelter creates boundaries between interior and exterior environments, discuss the metabolic cost of damp insulation, the hidden calorie drain that breaks expeditions. A dry 800 filled down bag might require your body to generate 80 watts of heat to maintain comfort at 15 degrees Fahrenheit. That same bag saturated to 20% moisture content might require 130 watts, 62% more metabolic output. Over 8 hours, that's an additional 1,440 kilocalories burned just to stay warm, equivalent to an entire day's food ration. You won't consciously feel this drain. Your body will simply shiver more, sleep less deeply, and wake with unexplained fatigue. By day 3 of a winter expedition, this cumulative deficit manifests as poor decision-making, reduced motivation, and increased activity. Studies of winter mountaineering expeditions show teams that maintained dry insulation consumed 22% fewer calories per day than teams with chronically damp gear, despite identical routes and temperatures. That calorie difference often decided summit success versus retreat. Indigenous winter travelers understood this equation intuitively. They'd rather walk an extra mile to camp in a breezy location that kept bedding dry than save energy by camping in a sheltered valley where vapor accumulated. They traded immediate comfort for sustained expedition capability. Modern winter campers make the opposite trade, choosing sheltered campsites that trap vapor, then wondering why they feel exhausted by day 3. Reverse this instinct. Prioritize breathability in campsite selection. Gentle breezes that exhaust vapor matter more than wind protection. Slightly exposed locations that allow vapor escape beat perfectly sheltered spots that trap your breath. Your calorie budget depends on it. Address children and group dynamics. The amplified vapor challenge of multi-occupant shelters. 2 adults produce 4 to 6 liters of vapor overnight. Add 2 children, and vapor production jumps to 7 to 9 liters, overwhelming even well-ventilated shelters. Indigenous family lodges solved this through architectural scaling. Larger lodges didn't just add floor space, they increased apex height proportionally, maintaining the critical convection ratio between floor area and exhaust volume. A lodge housing 8 people had an apex 50% higher than one housing 4, preserving the vapor-to-exhaust ratio. Modern family tents fail this scaling principle. They add floor space without increasing volume-to-surface ratios, creating vapor stagnation. Solution 1. Never max out your tent's rated occupancy in winter. A 4-person tent should house maximum 3 adults in sub-freezing conditions, preserving air volume for vapor dilution. Solution 2. Create internal vapor barriers between sleepers using hung tarps or gear piles, preventing one person's breath plume from saturating another's. Solution 3. Assign vapor management roles. One person wakes hourly to check condensation and adjust vents, rotating this duty through the night. Indigenous families practiced similar role rotation. Elders taught children to monitor lodge conditions as part of survival education. Solution 4. Position sleepers with heads oriented toward vents, creating personal vapor exhaust pathways rather than letting breath plumes stagnate above faces. These adaptations aren't luxuries for group winter camping. They're non-negotiable requirements because vapor accumulation scales non-linearly with occupancy. Double the people doesn't double the vapor problem. It quadruples it through compounded saturation effects. Now examine the condensation freezing cycle, the 24-hour rhythm that determines whether moisture becomes manageable or catastrophic. Phase 1, sunset to midnight. Vapor production exceeds exhaust capacity. Relative humidity climbs toward saturation. Condensation begins forming on coldest surfaces. Phase 2, midnight to 3 a.m. Radiative cooling drops tent wall temperatures to nightly minimum. Maximum condensation occurs, often freezing instantly on contact. This is the critical intervention window. Opening vents now prevents ice accumulation that would otherwise persist until dawn. Phase 3, 3 a.m. to sunrise. Ambient temperature stabilizes near minimum. Condensation rate slows but continues if vents remain closed. Ice layers thicken on walls and gear. Phase 4, sunrise to 9 a.m. Solar radiation begins warming tent walls. Ice layers melt into liquid water that drips onto gear unless wiped immediately. This is the second critical intervention window. Wiping walls before melt prevents secondary saturation. Phase 5, 9 a.m. to noon. Rising ambient temperature increases air's vapor holding capacity. Interior humidity drops if vents remain open, allowing residual moisture to evaporate from gear surfaces. Phase 6, noon to sunset. Gear drying window. Hanging damp items in sun and wind removes accumulated moisture before nightfall. Indigenous peoples structured their entire daily rhythm around this cycle, adjusting lodge ventilation at Phase 2, wiping walls at Phase 4, and dedicating morning hours to gear drying during Phase 5 and 6. They didn't fight the cycle, they worked with it, intervening at precise moments when small actions prevented large consequences. You can adopt this same temporal intelligence, setting alarms for critical intervention windows, structuring morning routines around drying opportunities, and understanding that vapor management isn't constant effort. It's strategic action at decisive moments. Let's synthesize the core principle that transcends gear. Vapor moves from warm to cold, from wet to dry, and from high pressure to low pressure. Your entire shelter strategy should facilitate these natural movements rather than resist them. Warm, vapor-laden air from your body wants to rise toward the tent apex. Give it an exhaust path. Vapor wants to move from your saturated sleeping bag toward drier tent air. Ensure your bag shell is vapor permeable on top while blocking downward migration. Interior air wants to exchange with drier exterior air when humidity saturates. Provide calibrated vents that enable this exchange without wind chill penetration. Indigenous peoples didn't invent new physics. They observed these natural movements and designed shelters that worked with them rather than against them. Your modern equivalent isn't buying different gear, it's arranging existing gear to facilitate vapor's natural pathways. Loosen your rainfly to create convection channels. Open high vents to provide exhaust points. Sleep with head outside hood to redirect breath plumes upward. These actions cost nothing but understanding, and that understanding transforms vapor from your enemy into a manageable flow you can direct like water through channels. Stop fighting your breath. Start channeling it. Before your next winter trip, perform this simple home test to feel vapor dynamics with your own hands. Inflate your sleeping pad. Place it on a cold tile floor. Lie down for 10 minutes breathing normally into a dry paper towel held over your mouth. After 10 minutes, feel the towel. It will be damp with condensed vapor. Now repeat the test with your head positioned outside an imaginary sleeping bag hood, breathing upward toward the ceiling. Hold the towel above your head instead of over your mouth. After 10 minutes, the towel will be significantly drier, because rising warm air carried vapor away before condensing. This tactile demonstration reveals what tent walls experience all night. Vapor either stagnates and condenses, or rises and exhausts. Your shelter design determines which outcome occurs. Indigenous peoples learned this through cold nights that taught lessons no manual could convey. You have the privilege of learning it safely at home tonight. Honor that privilege by internalizing the lesson. Vapor rises. Give it an exit. Everything else follows from this single. Remember this, when you're tempted to zip every vent against the cold, the moisture freezing on your tent walls right now originated in your lungs 10 minutes ago. You are literally watching your own breath crystallize into ice that will steal tomorrow night's warmth from your sleeping bag. This isn't poetic metaphor, it's thermodynamic reality. Every ice crystal on that wall represents heat energy your body will need to expend tomorrow just to melt before your insulation can function. That energy comes from calories you must carry on your back, calories that add weight, increase fatigue, and reduce expedition range. Vapor management isn't about comfort, it's about metabolic economy, the difference between carrying 5 days of food versus 7 days for the same route. Indigenous winter travelers understood this equation with life-or-death clarity. They'd rather feel a slight breeze through lodge flaps than carry extra pemmican to rewarm saturated fur. Your modern equivalent. Accept 2 degrees of additional chill from open vents to preserve 30% of your bag's loft. The trade-off isn't close. Dry cold is survivable. Damp cold kills. Always has. Always will. Your shelter's breathability isn't a luxury feature. It's your primary defense against the silent thermal debt accumulating with every exhale. This isn't about rejecting modern gear. It's about refusing to let waterproofing marketing override vapor physics. Your tent's rainfly serves a critical purpose, keeping liquid precipitation out during storms. But that purpose shouldn't dominate its entire design philosophy. In extended winter use, vapor management matters more than liquid water exclusion, because you produce vapor continuously while storms remain intermittent. The optimal winter shelter isn't maximally waterproof, it's optimally breathable, with just enough weather protection for expected conditions. Indigenous peoples achieve this balance through material selection, breathable hides, and geometry, adjustable exhaust. You achieve it through gear arrangement, air gaps between layers, and behavioral adaptation, calibrated ventilation. No single product solves this, only system intelligence, understanding how vapor moves and designing your entire shelter ecosystem to facilitate that movement. Carry gear, yes, but carry understanding heavier. Because when your tent walls ice over at 2 a.m. in a blizzard, no amount of waterproof rating will save your insulation. Only the understanding that vapor must exit, and the creativity to create that exit from whatever remains in your pack. The frozen breath on your tent wall isn't a sign of shelter failure. It's a sign of physics working exactly as predicted. Your warm, moist exhalations meeting cold surfaces and surrendering their vapor as ice. The question isn't whether condensation will form. It's whether you've designed an exit strategy for that vapor before it condenses. Indigenous hide lodges didn't prevent condensation. They prevented its accumulation through continuous exhaust. Your modern tent can do the same, not with expensive upgrades, but with intelligent geometry and vigilant management. Open that high vent, create that air gap, sleep with your head outside the hood. Let your shelter breathe like the living system it must become to sustain you through winter nights. Because the alternative isn't just discomfort, it's the slow, silent drowning in your own breath. The thermal debt that compounds night after night until your insulation fails and your body can no longer pay the interest. Breathe out. Let your shelter breathe out with you. And wake dry, warm, and ready for whatever the frozen world brings it.